Hello, everyone, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As usual, I want to remind everybody, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Okay, so this one's been kind of floating around in my little idea list for a while now. And, well, now's as good a time as any to discuss my thoughts on Jordan Peterson. I'm going to go ahead and break this down into a couple of different sections. At first, I want to talk about the book itself, and then kind of talk about Jordan Peterson, and then, of course, address the New York Times piece and his rebuttal to it. I had gotten his book, the 12 Rules for Life book, when it first came out, and I had finished reading it some months back, and personally, I enjoyed it. I mean, I know it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Basically, let's start out with who won't like this book. If you're somebody who isn't the hugest fan of non-linear storytelling, if you're somebody who likes it to kind of go like, you do A because of B and C, you're not going to like this. If you're somebody who's looking for more like a 12-step program, where it's specifically laid out to you what you should and should not be doing, you're not going to like this. I know it's been kind of discussed in different areas, but the way Jordan Peterson kind of constructs these chapters or rules, it's basically the rule is laid out. And then you kind of go on this little journey with Jordan Peterson as he explains to you why you should do this or not do that. And some of these are some kind of long, rambling walks in the woods where you get halfway through a chapter and you're thinking, how is he going to bring this back around to the original point? But somehow he always manages to. But like I said, if you're not somebody who really likes listening to storytelling like that, where somebody kind of just starts over here and then we kind of wander off into some other points and we kind of come back to the original point eventually, but we kind of go off on some tangents, you're not going to enjoy this at all. And as far as this not being a traditional self-help book, this isn't something where you read it and you do these 12 things and your life will be great. It's more about looking inward to figure out how you can make your life better. And here are some things to think about while you are turning your gaze inward instead of turning your gaze outward, which seems to be part of the appeal of this book. We'll kind of get to that later, but it's more of that message of not so much telling you what to do, but kind of having you ask yourself what you should be doing. The general message of this book, to me, is about growing up and becoming an adult and taking responsibility for your life on an individual level. And that I agree with. I like this book. Just discussing the book on its own, forgetting everything outside of the book, I do think there is worth and merit to reading it. Especially even if you are a woman. I know this always seems to kind of be presented as for men. Even one of the reviews on the back, it says, "Firm but caring. Peterson speaks the way I always wish my father had. He is the right man at the right time, so incapable of showing young men that cleaning up the room has cosmic significance, and that imposing a little order upon chaos is good for the soul, which in turn is good for the world," which is from the National Review's review of this book. And it's always interesting to me to see this presented that way. Because when I read it, I don't feel like the writing is gendered in any way. Sometimes you read something and you can tell it's written for a specific gender. I don't get that off of this book. So while it always seems to be presented as being for young men or men in general, I do think there is a lot that can be said and taken away from this for women too, especially the parts about growing up and taking responsibility for yourself. Another thing that might be a little off-putting to some people is Peterson's life view is very, very Taoist. It's very order, chaos, yin and yang. And there's a lot in this book that talks about the fact that pain and suffering is a part of the human condition and it is part of life. And this book gets really, really dark in some places. He kind of picks up this thread where he's talking about this one friend of his that he's had ever since he was a young child. And then obviously growing up, moving away from each other, kind of reconnecting. And this guy is very, very troubled and ultimately ends up committing suicide. But it's kind of things like that. And Jordan Peterson is very emphatic about that being part of life, which I don't disagree with. Obviously, I think that there is merit, especially to telling young people that, because I think a lot of these young people have grown up with the idea that everything's going to be sunshine and lollipops. And I think a part of this appeal of this book, especially to young men, is pointing out that, yes, life will sometimes kick you in the teeth. And that's just part of nature and part of life, and it's just something that you have to get through. But yeah, I do think the book is worth the read, especially if you can get past Peterson's more kind of scattershot writing style. I mean, if for nothing else than to kind of see what all the buzz is about and what the big deal is, it's worth the read. I mean, it's not the world's easiest read. It's definitely not a short book. But if you want to put in the time, I think it's worthwhile. I would suggest it. I would recommend it. Now, to move on to my thoughts on Jordan Peterson, the man. It strikes me that Jordan Peterson is very, very, very much a product of our current environment. And when I say that, I mean maybe even 5 years ago, this dude wouldn't have been popular. He certainly wouldn't have been popular 10 years ago. But it's because of this environment that's kind of been created with this social justice warrior and social justice warrior backlash, and then social justice warrior backlash, that somebody like Peterson can come to prominence based off of that kind of, well, I mean, what he was, the original thing, basically how he came into prominence was when he was just solely teaching at the University of Toronto. Canada introduced a bill, I forget, it's HB something or another, but anyway, the whole point of the bill was that it was going to force people to use other people's preferred gender pronouns. And his whole beef with that was that not so much that gender pronouns are a problem, but the idea that you can compel somebody to speak in a certain way. And he had a problem with that, obviously, as I can imagine pretty much anybody who lives in America and believes in the First Amendment can understand that the government conscripting you to speak in this way and not that way would be deeply offensive. But everybody kind of latched on to him for that. And he kind of came to prominence because of that, because then, of course, there were protests against him on campus. And I think a lot of people kind of glommed onto him because of the way he speaks and kind of his, not really voice pattern, but kind of the way that he can speak calmly to people who are yelling at him and kind of articulate his position very clearly. I think a lot of people glommed onto that. I think a lot of alt-right kind of people glommed onto him because they misunderstood what his issue was with the gender pronoun thing. They thought that he was protesting just gender pronouns in general, not really realizing that it went a little deeper than that, I think. But so that's kind of how he got famous. And then obviously he's got his YouTube videos that people started watching. And then the infamous Cathy Newman interview. For the 10 of you out there that haven't already watched this, I'll try to put a link in the show notes. But basically, Jordan Peterson was on television with a Canadian broadcaster named Cathy Newman. And the interview, it's a little over an hour long, if memory serves. And it's basically her just getting increasingly more and more frustrated with Peterson and basically trying to do gotcha journalism. And Jordan Peterson just fucking killed it. Like, dude stayed on point. He nailed it. He didn't fall for any of it. It's really just like mastercraft in how to handle that kind of situation. And so that video just blew up, and that blew up, I think it was right before the book came out. So obviously, book came out, hugely popular. It sold over 1 million copies, and basically nobody has stopped talking about Jordan Peterson since then. And of course, when everybody starts talking about you, eventually people are going to start criticizing you. And I've seen lots of different sorts of criticisms about Jordan Peterson. Some people say that what's contained in the book is really just basic shit, which, okay, I mean, I will grant that. But I think the reason a lot of us think that is because of the age that we are. And I mean that like chronologically. I think anybody kind of my age or older, like late 30s on, kind of looks at stuff like this as like, okay, this is basic shit. But then again, it's basic shit that we were taught. And I think a big problem with a lot of kind of what's going on with young people today is that the stuff that's in this book is revelatory for them. So I don't like that critique because it's kind of like, okay, so this is news to some people. So I mean, why, I'm not slamming the dude for that because obviously he's tapped into something. The other criticism about him I don't like is people criticizing his fan base. Now, are there problematic people who like Jordan Peterson? Absolutely. But here's the thing, and here's why I don't like people criticizing Peterson for that. Anybody who makes content, anybody who makes videos, podcasts, you write a book, you have a Twitter account, whatever it is, the only control you have is actually making the content and putting the content out there. And then after that, that's it. You have no control over who likes it, who doesn't like it, who's attracted to it, who's not. So trying to slam somebody because a certain group of people like their work, I don't get that because that's not something that anybody has control over. I mean, you make your content, you put it out there in the world, and you just hope somebody likes it. And as far as, I guess, certain alt-righty leaning kind of dudes liking it, honestly, I would rather see a young man read this book and kind of internalize it and start to get his shit together rather than becoming an incel or getting a fashy haircut and picking up a tiki torch. Like, there's worse things that could be happening than young men reading this book and cleaning their room and standing up straight and figuring their life out. Like, there's much worse things that they could be doing. And kind of another thought that I just had, it's weird to me knowing that this book has sold over 1 million copies at this point, and yet I've never seen anybody reading it in public. And this might be a product of living in Atlanta and not really having public transportation that's worth a shit. But I saw more people reading 50 Shades in public than I've seen reading Jordan Peterson's book in public. So it's kind of like this weird thing where it's like, it's wildly popular, but then again, it's kind of like Sosmodont, where everybody's just kind of reading it on the DL and nobody's really reading it in public. I just thought that was kind of funny to think about. Okay, so moving forward, we are now getting to the part where I have criticisms of Jordan Peterson, because isn't that what you're all here to hear me talk about anyway? Here's kind of where I'm at with this. I have identified 3 versions of Jordan Peterson. There is the book version of Jordan Peterson, there is the on TV version of Jordan Peterson, and then there is the Twitter version of Jordan Peterson. Now, book Jordan Peterson is just kind of like a nice, folksy kind of guy that just wants to tell you stories and kind of help you figure your life out. TV Peterson is really, really, really good. Like, even over and beyond the Kathy Newman piece, he was just on Bill Maher a couple of weeks ago, and I think he did a really good job on there too. He always just seems to do well on television, and especially even in like unscripted things like that. Like, that's a skill. Like, say whatever you want about the man. To be able to go into an unscripted environment with people who are going to be hostile towards you and still be able to make your points and stay on points, I mean, that's a fucking skill. I don't care what anybody has to say about that. Twitter Peterson, however, is the guy who calls people a sanctimonious prick and threatens to slap them. I can do without this version of Jordan Peterson. And I think, I mean, there is definitely a reason why Peterson is the way he is on Twitter, and we'll kind of get to that after we talk about the New York Times piece. But it's not the best look. Like, I mean, God knows we've all wanted to call somebody a sanctimonious prick on Twitter at least once, but not all of us are presenting ourselves in the way that Jordan Peterson is trying to present himself as a grown-up, intelligent, deep-thinking adult. So I can kind of, yeah, I can live without Twitter Jordan. Like, Twitter Jordan needs to take it down about 5 notches. And on the topic of Twitter Jordan, this is a nice time to segue into the aforementioned New York Times piece. basically, it was Friday, I do believe, that this piece dropped. Which, why come all these always drop on a Friday? Like, do it earlier in the week so I can talk about it that week. Like, don't wait till after I record. But, yeah, Friday, this piece dropped. It was written by a woman. I will look up her name here in a minute. But I want to start with just the overall impression of this, which, first of all, again, what is with New York Times and these pictorials that they're doing with these? Like, I know we all went in on the one that they did for the intellectual dark web, but this one has those same kind of, like, moody, ambient, side shot pictures, and I still maintain this has set the standard now. If I'm ever profiled by the New York Times, I want glamour shots. I want them too. It's not fair, and I don't understand why only people in the intellectual dark web get these. I want them too. Our intrepid lady reporter's name is Nellie Bowles, which I don't even know how I forgot that because Dave Rubin's mentioned it about 11 times, but anyway. Basically, she spent 2 days with Peterson at his house, kind of watching him make a YouTube video, talking to him, this, that, and the other, and this article is the product of those 2 days. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this article for one very, very glaringly obvious reason, but kind of where we start out and where a lot of people have kind of ripped on dude is I don't really know where he's going with some of this. Like, there's long tangents about how witches live in swamps and old kings live in desiccated castles and witches and dragons are real. Jordan speaks a lot in kind of like that parable sort of way of kind of telling a story to tell another story. And I will go ahead and give the man the benefit of the doubt, knowing how he speaks and how he writes, that some of this may have been kind of edited out of context, like you may have missed the before part and the after part of what was said. But the part that everybody wants to talk about is the enforced monogamy quote, which I am going to go ahead and say this verbatim from the piece, just so that we are all completely clear on what was said and how he said it, because I've seen a lot of people try to defend this, and I've seen a lot of people try to defend it that I don't know if they actually have read the text of what was said. So let's go ahead and read it verbatim, just so there is no confusion. Okay, just for a little bit of backdrop, he's talking about incels in general, and he's going to be specifically talking about Toronto Van guy, whose name I still can't pronounce because I don't care to figure it out. But here we go. Violent attacks are what happens when men do not have partners, Mr. Peterson says, and society needs to work to make sure those men are married. Okay, here is the actual quote from Jordan Peterson. He was angry at God because women were rejecting him, Mr. Peterson said of the Toronto killer. The cure for that is enforced monogamy. That's actually why monogamy emerges. Mr. Peterson does not pause when he says this. Enforced monogamy is, to him, simply a rational solution. Otherwise, women will all go for the most high-status men, he explains, and that couldn't make either gender happy in the end. Half the men fail, he said, meaning that they don't procreate. And then no one cares about the men who fail. I laugh because it is absurd. You're laughing about them, he says, giving me a disappointed look. That's because you're female. Woo-saw. Okay. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds about how I feel about enforced monogamy / sexual redistribution, because I just did a whole episode on that a couple of weeks ago, where I talk about the Hansen piece and the Dothit piece discussing this. But suffice it to say, it wasn't cute when Hansen said it, it wasn't cute when Dothit said it, it's not cute when Peterson says it. Also, another thing that I kind of want to talk about that I mentioned in that podcast episode was my problem with having that discussion is that even if you're going to make this whole little like navel gazing, whoa, let's just ponder this, is when you do that, you're legitimizing the fact that this is something that should even be discussed in the first place, which, here we are. I was right. I would like a round of applause now. Thank you. And here's a little more from the piece going forward from that. But aside from interventions that would redistribute sex, Mr. Peterson is staunchly against what he calls equality of outcomes or efforts to equalize society. He usually calls them pathological or evil. He agrees that this is inconsistent, but preventing hordes of single men from violence, he believes, is necessary for the stability of society. Enforced monogamy helps neutralize that. In situations where there is too much mate choice, a small percentage of guys have hyper access to women and so they don't form relationships with women, he said. And the women hate that. Okay. Given the amount of material here on the topic, I find it very hard to believe that he was taken out of context in any sort of way. And also, when you are talking about a person who has made a point, rule number 10, be precise in your words, and has made a point of telling people that you have to be very careful what you say and how you say it, I find this very hard to think that this was somehow twisted or misconstrued in any way. And even so, the words enforced monogamy came out of this man's mouth. There's no two-stepping around that. That is what was said. So, going forth from that, I've seen a lot of people do a, well, actually about this. I'm like, no, there is no well, actually about it. That's what the man said, point blank. The only person's opinion who I care about this is Jordan Peterson's. And he had a rebuttal. And we're going to go ahead and read it now. This is from his own site, where he put up a post citing a couple different studies. Somebody from fucking Reddit. But basically trying to, in my view, walk back what was said. Or try to parse it in a way where it's obvious what you were trying to say, but you're trying to kind of do this little walk back. Try to make it sound a little more benign than what you meant. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the actual skip over quoting people from Reddit and quoting studies and doing all that, and just get exactly to Peterson's words on this. So, let's summarize. Men get frustrated when they are not competitive in the sexual marketplace. Note, the fact that they do get frustrated does not mean that they should get frustrated. Pointing out the existence of something is not the same as justifying its existence. Frustrated men tend to become dangerous, particularly if they are young. The dangerousness of frustrated young men, even if that frustration stems from their own incompetence, has to be regulated socially. The manifold social conventions tilting most societies towards monogamy constitute such regulation. That's all. No recommendation of police state assignation of women to men, or for that matter, man to woman. No arbitrary... I can't talk today. No arbitrary dealing out of damsels to incels. Nothing scandalous, all innuendo and suggestive editing to the contrary. Just the plain, bare, common sense facts. Socially enforced monogamous conventions decrease male violence. In addition, and not trivially, they also help provide mothers with comparatively reliable male partners, and increase the probability that stable, father-intact homes will exist for children. Okay. I don't even know where to start with this. Let me just go ahead and say, as per usual, I feel like a broken record saying this, but I will link all of my source material in the show notes. That way you guys can peruse it at your leisure. But this whole piece, there's a rhetorical feint that really annoys the shit out of me when people do it. And that's this thing, it's not exactly a dog whistle per se, but it's this thing where somebody presents you with a series of facts that it's clear that they want you to draw a specific conclusion from these series of facts, but they don't want to say the specific conclusion that they want you to draw, so that it kind of like keeps your hands clean, so that you're like, you didn't say that, like, oh, you read this and you assumed that's what I was saying. Like, no, it's pretty fucking clear what you were wanting me to think by presenting these facts to me. So this kind of what I get from this, and it really, like I said, it annoys the shit out of me. Like, if you're going to have weird-ass retrograde opinions, I'd rather you just own them outright than to try to do this little, like, pop up, pop down, like, I didn't say that, but, like, no, but you fucking meant it. So, whether what you said doesn't really matter. It's what you meant when you said it. So next up on the list of things that annoy me about this is even in the 2 weeks, I believe it's been since I made the sexual redistribution episode, I've seen the Overton window on this shift a bit to it being something where we should think about this because it's not fair that these men don't have sexual partners, to this idea that we have to get these men sexual partners, otherwise they will become violent. And that it is somehow on women to make sure that these men don't become violent, which, fuck out of here with that. Stop it. It is not my job as a woman, or any other woman's job, to make sure that you do not become a violent human being. It is every individual's job to make sure that they do not become a violent human being. And then the next thing that just ticks me off is this whole idea that, oh, well, we don't want the state to do it. Nobody with any degree of intellectual honesty was insinuating that that's what you were saying. And quite frankly, I don't care who the fuck you think is going to be doing the enforcing. No enforcing. None. I don't care if it's the state. I don't care if it's society, which, by the way, it's not going to be society. It's basically you're asking one group of people to make sure another group of people doesn't become violent, which, no, you can get the hell out of here with that. But, I mean, you're just putting words in people's mouths. Like, nobody suggested that you were saying that. But the thing that bugs me the most about this explanation is that this runs counter to everything that you tried to teach people in this book. That basically you are responsible for you. And that you are responsible for taking care of yourself. And in the words of one Jordan Peterson, grow the fuck up and take care of yourself and your own life. Now you're basically saying that it is somebody else's job. That it's women's job to take these men and make them just non-violent people, which I've already explained my thoughts on that. But, and just kind of another thing that just struck me as funny about this is, in the book, women are presented as the agents of chaos and men are presented as the agents of order. And I'm sorry, if our vaginas are the only thing stopping y'all from becoming a bunch of homicidal lunatics, really, who the fuck is chaos and who the fuck is order here? Because it really seems to me that if apparently we are the ones that are keeping you guys on the straight and narrow, I would make the argument that we are order and you are chaos. How about that? Okay, I need to leave that piece be and move on because I'm just going to keep getting progressively more and more angry about it. But I want to pivot to my general thoughts on what exactly is going on in the New York Times piece and in this rebuttal. And it's a topic that I've seen one of the Weinsteins politely referred to it as audience capture. I less politely refer to it as feeding the beast. It's this concept that one can become captured by one's audience. And it's something that I think everybody who makes content thinks about to one extent or another, because, I mean, you know what tweets are going to go wide. You know what podcast episodes are going to play out with your base. Like, you know what is and is not going to work, or at least be popular amongst your base. And it is something that I think everybody kind of tries to find that balance of kind of giving your people the red meat but still staying true to yourself and your ideals. And I think that becomes more and more of a problem when your fans are your direct employers. Like, as in, like, when you have a Patreon page and people are giving you tens of thousands of dollars a month. Like, I can see where there would be at least a strong temptation, if not a straight up feeling of obligation to give the people what they want. And I think that's what this is you're pandering to your base, but you're doing it in a way that you're not being true to yourself. And that is a massive, massive fucking problem. If you're going to hold yourself out there as an intellectual, you can't do that. Because it's a very, very slippery slope. It's what you gain from doing that, what you gain in notoriety, what you gain in popularity, what you gain in love from your base, you lose in credibility to anybody else. So I feel like Peterson is kind of not walking that line very well. And I think that's what a lot of this is. I think that's what a lot of Twitter Jordan is. I think that's what I think that's what this is. Like, do I think he actually believes in any of that? I don't fucking know. It certainly seems to run counter to everything that he has said prior to that. But it's what his base wants to hear, so he says it. And whether he's doing it, like, in kind of like the crass, cynical way that I'm kind of portraying it as, or if it's something a little more honest than that, it's still really, really bad. And speaking of the man's fan base, we're in a very weird place right now where it's like, nobody can hold a middle ground on Peterson. It's like you're either expected to just love this dude or hate him. And anybody that expresses anything of like a middle ground opinion just kind of gets savaged. And his fans have a lot to do with that, because it's like you can't even write anything that's just even not even criticizing the man, just not completely, oh my God, he's the best thing ever. Holy shit, everybody should be following this man. Which brings us to the Matt Welch reason piece on Jordan Peterson, which, by the way, is not a hit piece. It is not a hit piece. It is a rather nice piece about the man, I must say. But Matt does have a couple different quibbles, basically based around the fact that Peterson kind of sounds like he has a little bit of a messianic complex. But, just expressing those opinions in a piece that is otherwise complimentary towards Jordan Peterson is apparently a hit piece. And I saw this when he originally tweeted out the link to the piece, and I tweeted something back at him, but I saw already by that point he was already getting the hit piece responses, and I was just like, oh shit, here we go with this nonsense. But it's this weird place that we exist in right now where you can't even just say something mildly complimentary about the man. And anything that even approaches criticism is, oh my God, you fucking suck. You're the worst. Delete your account. But I bring up Matt's piece because the piece itself, and pointing out rightly that the man does have a little bit of a messianic complex, and the response to the piece itself kind of helps demonstrate why he might feel this way. Because when you have people around you that basically think you can do no wrong, that everything you say is absolutely 1000% true, it's unquestionable, to question it is to commit some sort of cardinal sin, I can see where that would fuck with you. Like, I can see where that would fuck with your head, and you would kind of start believing your own hype. Which, of course, everybody knows that's like one step away from jumping the shark, is when you believe your own hype. Which I've seen people suggest that maybe now he's jumped the shark. I'm not entirely ready to throw in the towel on the man yet. I do think there can be redemption for Jordan Peterson at this point. But here is what would have to happen. And yes, I know, I will say it before I even make this list, I am an eternal optimist. So I know this is probably not going to happen, but here's how you would do it. First off, you gotta stop feeding the beast. You stop doing that. You have to maintain yourself, and you have to remember what made you popular in the first place. That is step one. Step number two, and this is kind of out of Peterson's control, but his fan base needs to back way the fuck up. He's not the second coming. He's just a man who has written a fairly good book and has done some good YouTube videos and some good interviews. That's it. You don't need to deify this man. You don't have to stand for everything he says. You can just treat him like a man who said some smart things that you agree with. That's it. And then the third thing that has to happen is this intellectual dark web nonsense needs to stop. I mean, I discussed this in the week before that one. The concept of the intellectual dark web and the problems that I could see coming forth from that. And one of them was kind of this cliquish thought bubble kind of thing going on, which I can see happening with this whole New York Times piece. And obviously Dave Rubin has decided that he needs to be Peterson's mouthpiece on this. I don't know. Eric Weinstein has tweeted out things trying to defend it, which no, just stop it. Like, you don't have to stand for something that everybody says. Like, it's just, I don't like the intellectual dark web. I think it's a really fucking dumb idea, if we're being honest. But he needs to get away from that kind of mentality, that kind of groupthink where everybody's going to agree with you and try to ride for you, and your whole fan base is going to agree with you and try to ride for you. And it's not a good thing for anybody to be in that environment. But yeah, I still hold out hope that maybe the man can be rehabilitated, can kind of veer off of this path that he's on and get back on a more sane, logical path, I guess. It would be the best way that I can think to describe it. But on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. If you do like this, of course, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Take care, and until next time.